He's one of Wisconsin's most notorious killers.
I'm innocent. I won't do nothing to harm nobody.
Freed from prison, only to be convicted in a brutal murder.
They're planting evidence.
DNA doesn't lie.
Stephen Avery.
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 Let's talk about it. Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you, and if you're returning, welcome back. I'm excited to see you again. On my channel, we talk about something true crime related, paranormal, weird history, just kind of anything that I'm finding interesting. So if that's something that you might be interested in, do me a favor and hit the little subscribe button down below, as well as the bell icon so you can be notified when I upload. Only if you want to though, no pressure if you don't. But with that being said, I do want to give a quick warning, my typical warnings that I do every time. Some of the stuff that we talk about here can be pretty heavy, so if that's something your mental health cannot handle, just do me a favor and click off this video and I will catch you somewhere else, but your mental health will always be so much more important than any YouTube video ever will be. Another thing that I want to say is that especially the true crime cases, some of these people might still be alive. I want everyone to remember that as we move forward, discussing anything down in the comments. I would hate for someone's loved one to read something and be hurt by the conversation that is happening, especially with this case, because this one's rough. There's been so much information spread out there. This case is still being talked about to this day, and I'm talking about it now. And I just know that Teresa Halbach's family, they're still very much alive and well, and I think for so long they have had to listen to stories about Teresa, and so when talking about it here, I want to remain respectful and kind and sympathetic towards them. They lost someone that they loved so much and that had so much to offer the world, and I would hate to perpetuate any kind of hurt towards this family. So with that being said, just remember to please remain respectful. I will delete comments that aren't respectful, that are hateful in any type of way. I will 100% delete those. So with all of that being said, we're gonna go ahead and dive into today's case. So the Daily Wire just dropped a new docuseries called Convicting a Murderer. I understand that the majority of people will not watch this docuseries because of the platform it is on. I 100% understand. I get it. But I was morbidly curious and I had to watch it. I did watch Making a Murderer when it came out in 2015. I actually watched it in 2016, I think in February of 2016, and was taken aback by it as everyone else. So when Convicting a Murderer came out, I needed to see the rebuttal, and so considering that many won't watch this, I figured I would take some of the information that I learned on Convicting a Murderer and we'll bring that information here. With that being said, this is a massive case. Massive. I have been researching for a month now. And there are some days where I can't. I cannot listen to any more Stephen Avery. I can't. But I do have the first two episodes, videos that I want to record written, and I'm going to try to get through as much as I can today, and then I'm going to try to post these as quickly as I can. So with all of that being said, let's jump in. So I think in order to get a clear understanding of this case, we need a rough timeline. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you a rough timeline. It's going to be pretty watered down, but we'll get into the nitty-gritty in later videos. So today we're going to talk about just a rough timeline. One thing that I do want to kind of criticize both documentaries on is I think both of them kind of forget about who is in the center of this case. Convicting a Murderer did do a lot better than Making a Murderer, but they still were both not done enough, I think. Teresa was not the focal point of this, and that's really disheartening to me. So I want to take a little bit of time to get to know Teresa, who she was as a person, because she was an absolute gorgeous human. Teresa was born in 1980 and she grew up on a dairy farm just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. Teresa sadly lost her father when she was 8 years old, but her mother did get remarried and she had a blended family. Teresa had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they all got along so wonderfully. They all just loved each other so very much. Teresa, I think she had a very soft spot in her heart for her sisters. She really loved spending time with her sisters, and her sisters loved spending time with her. Teresa went to the University of Wisconsin, and that's where she studied photography. That was her major. Teresa's goal in life was actually to be a National Geographic photographer. And Teresa didn't just love photography, she was very, very talented. She was a wonderful photographer, and yeah. But during her time in university, Teresa kind of let out her more brave side. She went on several overseas trips. She went to Australia and she went to Spain, and she also spent some time in Mexico. But while she was in Australia, she went scuba diving right off the Great Barrier Reef. So she was really adventurous and loved to explore different parts of the world and just see other things. She had a love for life, and you can tell that everything she did, she just wanted to live her life to the fullest. After Teresa graduated university, she graduated with honors. She decided to go pursue her photography career. She was trying to get photos by Teresa off the ground, and in her spare time she would work for Auto Trader and go around and take pictures of vehicles. I don't know if y'all remember Auto Trader, but it was a magazine where people would post their cars and you could buy them from that magazine or call or whatever, but she would go and take those photos for people. But just to let you know how much Teresa loved photography, one of her best friends was actually getting married, and her friend said, now you can either be my bridesmaid or you can be my photographer. And Teresa begged her friend to be able to be her photographer. That's what she wanted to do. And you know, other friends would have her take pictures of their children and their dogs and other, you know, they would always expect things to not go well, but somehow Teresa was always able to get that shot that they wanted, and she just had a knack for it. And Teresa just made friends everywhere she went. People said that if you knew Teresa, you were her friend. And if you knew Teresa and they were going on an adventure and you weren't really a part of it, Teresa had this way of making you feel like you were going to miss out if you didn't go on this adventure with her. She just was friends with everybody. She was wonderful. Her and her friends were, I mean, she was a typical 25-year-old. She was going out with her friends, spending time with her family, like trying to get her career launched. Like, she was just a very typical 25-year-old girl, but she just had this way about her that made everyone love her and want to be her friend and want to be a part of their adventures. They would go sing karaoke, and her favorite song to sing was Pictures by Sheryl Crow and Kid Rock. Sorry, it was Picture by Sheryl Crow and Kid Rock. And she just loved life. And sadly, her life was taken from her far too soon. I think she's just gotten lost in the chaos that is this case. And as we move forward, I'll try to do a little reminder about Teresa every time we sit down to talk about this case. But just remember Teresa, because Teresa is the real victim in this. So I think in order to understand the Steven Avery case, we need to go back to 1985. In 1985, if you've seen Making a Murderer, you know that Steven Avery was wrongfully convicted of the assault against Penny Bernstein. In July of 1985, Penny Bernstein and her husband decided to go to the beach in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, just to kind of relax after a day of work. Penny was a runner at the time. She really enjoyed to run. So after they got settled in on the beach, she decided to go for a run down the beach. While she was running down the beach, she ran into a man who had a jacket on, like a big leather jacket. This was July, so she did think it was kind of weird, but they exchanged some pleasantries and then she kept running. She ran for a while before deciding to turn back, and when she got to the same area of the beach where she had seen that man, he was still there, but this time he came towards her and attacked her. This man drug Penny into more of a wooded or more of a secluded area, and this is where he assaulted her. This was a brutal assault. He beat her absolutely viciously, and somehow Penny was able to survive this attack. She was actually found by 2 other people that were on the beach, and they stayed with her while 911 was called and emergency services came. When Penny got to the hospital, there was a kit done, and then she was able to give police a description. One of the responding officers was Judy Dvorak. When Penny gave the description of her attacker, allegedly Judy Dvorak said, well, that sounds like Stephen Avery. But Judy Dvorak was not just friends with Penny Bernstein, she was also friends with a woman named Sandra Morris. Sandra Morris is someone in this case that gets a really bad rap because just a little bit prior to this, Sandra and Stephen had an altercation. Stephen was currently facing charges brought against him because of a situation he had with Sandra Morris. Stephen ran Sandra Morris off the road and pointed a gun at her when Sandra went around town saying that he was having adult relations with his wife on their front yard and exposing himself to people. These allegations had upset Stephen so much that when he saw Sandra driving past his house one morning, he got in his vehicle, followed her, ran her off the road, and then pointed a gun at her. Stephen did all of this to make Sandra stop talking about him. So there's that. So there's a lot of people who speculate that Judy Dvorak actually said that Penny's attacker sounded like Stephen Avery because of the pending charges he had because of Sandra Morris. This was a very personal attack. Her attacker was in her face, so Penny was able to give a very good description of her attacker. There was a composite sketch that was drawn from Penny's description. Now, again, allegedly, some people say that Stephen's mugshot was brought in because Stephen did have prior charges and he had spent time in prison prior, so he had a mugshot, and so some people believe that a mugshot was brought from the county jail to the hospital and that this composite sketch was actually drawn from Stephen Avery's mugshot. Now, if you compare the two, I'll probably have them up on the screen now, it does really look like Stephen Avery. But when Penny looked at the composite sketch, she did say that this looked like her attacker. So police did a photo lineup with different photos, and they included Stephen's mugshot, and Penny did point out Stephen's mugshot from this photo lineup. They then did a live lineup, and Stephen was once again picked out by Penny Bernstein. It is a little bit strange because Penny's original description did not match Stephen Avery. She said that the attacker had brown eyes and Stephen has blue eyes. She said that his underwear were white, and apparently, allegedly, Stephen Avery didn't even own underwear at the time of this attack. She also said that her attacker was about 6 foot tall and Stephen Avery is not 6 foot tall. There are several discrepancies in Penny's description and Stephen Avery's look. But it didn't really matter because Stephen was arrested that night and he was questioned. The problem is that Stephen did have a pretty solid alibi. Okay, I'm gonna be looking down at my notes a lot for this because the timeline there's a lot of times to remember, so if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. But Penny's attack happened around 3:50 on July 29th of 1985. That day in particular, Stephen was out at the salvage yard with his family pouring concrete. They did this until about 3:30 that afternoon. Stephen was around his entire family that whole afternoon. He had about 11 witnesses stating that he was in fact there. They even had a time where the concrete truck had stopped by the Avery Salvage Yard and Stephen was there at the time. Right around 3:30, Stephen and his sister Barbara went to the local gravel pit. They got stuck at this gravel pit and they didn't get back to the salvage yard until about 4 p.m. Right after that, Stephen and his wife Lori and their 4 children got into the car and drove to Green Bay, which is about 30 minutes to 45 minutes away from their home. And there they got something to eat, they washed their car, and then they went to the store and bought a couple of things. They did have a receipt, a time-stamped receipt that did prove that they were at the store right when they said that they were. This receipt was stamped at 5:13 in the afternoon. When they come home, Stephen and his younger brother Earl are putting up doing some housework to Stephen's house, and they do this until about close to midnight, and then that's when police show up and arrest Steven Avery. This leaves a very, very, very short amount of time for Steven to commit this crime. In fact, it's really impossible if you factor in Steven and Lori having to buckle up all their kids into car seats. And if he were still able to do it, he must have been speeding like crazy in order to get to Green Bay. But Steven did have a pretty solid alibi, and he was still questioned even after all of that. On top of all of this, there was a man named Gregory Allen who lived in Manitowoc as well, and he had a very violent history when it came to women. In fact, this man was so violent and so notorious for being violent that the Manitowoc Police Department was actually surveilling him pretty much all the time. They would swing by his house multiple times a day just to see what he was doing, and all of this was backed up with a log. But just as fate would have it, right at the time that Penny Bernstein was attacked, the Manitowoc Police Department was actually called to do something else, and they were not surveilling Gregory Allen at that time. Allegedly, the Manitowoc Police Department even went to the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department and told them that they had the wrong guy, but they just proceeded on with charges against Steven Avery. Steven was sentenced to 32 years in prison for the attack on Penny Bernstein. He was adamant that he had not done it and that he was innocent. And in Wisconsin, they have a law that if you do not admit to your crime, you will not get parole. So Steven, who would not confess that he had done this to Penny Bernstein, would sit in prison for his entire term because he would not admit that he had done this. But Steven would continue to fight for his exoneration, and he tried every avenue he could think of, but he wouldn't be successful until he got in touch with the Wisconsin Innocence Project. With the help of the Innocence Project, they were able to do DNA testing on several hairs that had been found in the kit performed on Penny Bernstein. 2 of those hairs did not have the little tag on them, and so they were not able to test them for DNA. One came from a woman, probably Penny Bernstein, and then there was one more hair left that was of male DNA and would be able to be tested. When this hair was tested, they did find that it did not belong to Steven Avery. Steven's DNA was not on Penny Bernstein, but the DNA did come back as a match to Gregory Allen. So Steven Avery really did spend time in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was 100% innocent of the crime against Penny Bernstein. So on September 11th of 2003, Steven was finally released from prison, and he was welcomed with open arms from all of his family. They were all so excited to see him.
It was a walk Steven Avery had dreamed of for 18 years. Finally, freedom. As he takes his first steps outside the state prison in Stanley, he's asked how it felt.
It feels free.
Simply, it feels free. Back home, relatives waited patiently. After 18 years, the last few hours were the longest, until finally, the reunion.
Too long, though, too long. Oh, God, I love you, baby. Oh, God. I'm glad you're home, honey.
Tonight, we sat down with Avery as it all started to sink in. He says he's not sure what comes next.
I don't know. Well, probably get up and eat breakfast or something.
Try to have a regular day, huh?
Yeah, I have to try a little bit. It'd be different sleeping in a good bed.
But it was after his exoneration that Steven decided he was going to file suit against the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Steven and I don't think Steven himself came up with this number, but his attorneys and the team he was working with asked for $36 million in this lawsuit. $36 million. That is not a small amount. But Steven seemed to be moving on with his life. While he was in prison, his wife actually divorced him and took the kids. They didn't come visit him very much in prison anymore. And even after getting out of prison, he didn't have a lot of contact with his children, and he had no contact with Lori. She had moved on and gotten remarried, and he had lost so much while he was in prison. But when he got out, it seemed like he was finally moving on with his life. He was seeing a new girl. Her name was Jody Jody Staskowski, and I butchered that name, I understand, please correct me in the comments, but he was working on this lawsuit and he stood to get quite a significant amount of money from this lawsuit. There was also a new bill that was being created in Wisconsin to help prevent against wrongful incarceration, and this was going to be called the Stephen Avery bill. Everything seemed to be going so well for him. That was until October 31st of 2005. That is the day that Teresa Halbach went missing.
This is Action 2 News at 10. Coverage you can count on.
Good evening. We will have that story in just a moment. First, we have some breaking news from Calumet County.
Sheriff Jerry Poggle called us in the last 2 hours for help in finding a missing 25-year-old Hilbert woman. He's calling her disappearance suspicious. Our Jason Zimmerman live in our newsroom now with all the details. Jason?
Bill, 25-year-old Teresa Marie Halbach was last seen Monday afternoon. This is a picture of Teresa. She was last seen Monday afternoon in Manitowoc. Her close friends tell us tonight no one has heard from her, which is very unusual. She also has not showed up for work or her home. Friends say they've tried calling her cell phone, but her voicemail box is full. Teresa Halbach is 5'6", about 135 pounds. She has light brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, a white button-down shirt, and a summer jacket. The Calumet County Sheriff says she was driving a 1999 dark green Toyota RAV4 like this one, license plate SWH582. Again, this is 25-year-old Teresa Marie Halbach from Hilbert. She was last seen Monday. The Calumet County Sheriff is calling her disappearance suspicious. If you've seen Teresa, please call the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Reporting from the newsroom, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.
So, as I said, Teresa Halbach was a photographer for Auto Trader. I think she did this to kind of supplement her income while she was getting her actual photography business off the ground. But Teresa had a couple appointments that day, and Stephen would call Auto Trader to see if she would be able to make a same-day appointment. Usually, Auto Trader didn't do this kind of thing. You had to make that appointment in advance, but every now and then they would allow it if the photographer had time. As luck would have it, Teresa did have time that day to be able to come and take photos of the, it was actually Stephen's sister's van that he was trying to put into Auto Trader. Stephen made this appointment under his sister's name, Barbara Yonda. The lady who took the appointment was unable to understand him completely, so the appointment name was set up as B Yonda. Stephen also gave his sister's phone number as the contact point for this appointment, even though he was the one making the appointment. Teresa was taking a few photos in that area that day, and she had an appointment with these zipperers who was not exactly a neighbor, but they lived in the same area as the Averys, or as the Avery Salvage Yard, or where the Avery Salvage Yard was. So Teresa did think that she could swing by and take a couple pictures of this van while she was in the area. Teresa had been to the salvage yard plenty of times to take photos of these vehicles to put in Auto Trader, so this was not an unusual request for Stephen Avery to make. He had done this on multiple occasions. But it was after this appointment, this was a Monday night, and it was after this appointment that Teresa just vanishes into thin air. No one sees her for several days after this, and it wasn't until November 3rd that her mother finally became aware that something was very wrong. Teresa did live on her parents' property, but she lived in her own apartment type place, so she didn't live in the home with her parents, and she did have a roommate as well. And it kind of seems like, as an adult, you just kind of start doing your own thing and you don't maybe talk to your parents every single day. So it wasn't until November 3rd that Teresa's mother calls Calumet County Sheriff's Department and reports Teresa as missing.
Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Hi, I'd like to report a missing person. Okay. And how long have they been missing? Nobody's heard from her since Monday. Okay. Hang on 1 second, please, here. And where does this person live? She's our daughter. She lives right next door to us. Over. That's her address? Right. And her name? Teresa Halbach. K-A-R.
K-O, Karen, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Okay, what relationship is she to you?
My daughter.
Okay. And how old?
She's 25.
Okay, do you know where she was last seen?
She works for Auto Trader. They had gotten a fax from her on Monday at 10:31. They had texted her today, but they don't know if she got it or not. They haven't heard from her. And we haven't talked to her since Sunday. She was over here.
Okay, she works for Auto Trader.
And she also works for herself. She's self-employed.
An investigation is immediately launched, and I think the first thing they try to do in any missing persons case is try to find or try to nail down the person's last steps. Where were they last? And so they go to Auto Trader and they look at all of the appointments that Teresa had that day. So it doesn't take them long to realize that the Avery Salvage Yard is the last place that Teresa is seen. Police obviously go to the salvage yard to question everyone there to see what exactly happened or if any of them saw Teresa. Initially, Stephen says that Teresa never made it. He told his family that Teresa never came. He also told police that he had not seen Teresa that day, and even though he had set up an appointment with her, that she just never showed up. This story would change, though, frequently. And eventually he landed on Teresa did come and she did take pictures, but then she left. Stephen is questioned several times, and one of the first times that he is questioned, he even allows investigators to come into his home. He's living on a trailer close to the salvage yard, and he allows investigators to come into his home and search, and they find nothing and they leave. Stephen then talks to reporters.
No. Well, tonight, the cops come and they asked me if I remember anything. And I told them no. No. And then they asked me if they can come in the house and check the house over. I said, oh, I got no problem with that. Come on in. So they checked the house all over. Everything was fine, and they left.
Mm-hmm. If they asked you to take a polygraph, would you? Would you not? And why?
Well, I got nothing to hide. They want me to, but I don't care. I'm just at home, work up there all day. I barely go anywhere. Once in a while I go to Manitowoc and come back. That's about it.
So when you heard about it, how did you feel?
It's too close to home, something happening. It's not good. Everybody locks their doors now around here. It's pretty bad when something happens around here. I can see somewhere else, but this is too close to home. You get a little worried, and you know, your family.
And it doesn't, I mean, knowing her, I mean, what are your feelings for her parents? And
they must be going through hell. You know, I figure my mom and my dad and everybody else, my family, they went through hell when I went did 18 years for something I didn't do. I figured they're going through probably the same thing because they lost somebody or whatever. You know, she's got to be out there somewhere.
By November 5th, there is still no sight of Teresa, and no one knows where she has gone. No one has found her vehicle, no one has found Teresa, and it's very strange. This isn't like her. Teresa is not the kind of person to just not call back, not show up, and not check in. So her friends and family decide that they want to start their own search party. So that's exactly what they do. And this is led by Teresa's ex-boyfriend and also her brother. Since Teresa was last seen near the Avery Salvage Yard, they start looking in that area. They don't just search the salvage yard, they're searching the surrounding area because who knows where she has gone. It was actually Teresa's sister, Pam Sturm, and her daughter, Nicole, that asked Earl Avery if they could search the salvage yard. Earl Avery is more than happy to allow them to search the salvage yard, and Earl kind of points them in the direction of how to enter the salvage yard and where to kind of go. Within 35 minutes of searching the salvage yard, Pam Sturm calls 911 and she says that she thinks she has found Teresa's RAV4. Teresa's RAV4 was found on a berm kind of on the edge of the property. Pam says that the reason this car stuck out to her was because it looked newer than the cars that were in this area, and it was also covered up. It was covered up by like other wooden planks and branches, and there was even the hood of another car kind of trying to cover it up. And Pam calls 911 and they start trying to find the VIN number, and the plates to the RAV4 are gone. So they can't see if this is Teresa's car by just the plates. So Pam and Nicole kind of back off and allow police to investigate this further. So because Teresa's RAV4 was found on the salvage yard, this would cause the salvage yard to become a crime scene. The Averys were taken, like they had to leave the property and they had to go to their cabin, which was like 80 miles away in Crevitz, I believe is what it's called. But they had to go stay there. They were not allowed on their own property because police had to search. Teresa's RAV4 was taken to Madison to the Wisconsin Crime Lab, and they started searching it. The key was not with it, but there was a lanyard found inside. Like the end, you know how like you can unclip a lanyard, the like loop of it, the one that you put over your head, that was found in the center console of the RAV4. There was also several drops of blood and blood smears found inside the RAV4, not just in the front of the RAV4, but also in the back. The blood that was found in the back of the RAV4 had what they called a spaghetti pattern, and they say that you get this pattern of blood when it's in the hair, and the hair like transfers the blood. So it kind of has this like squiggly pattern to it. So they thought that maybe Teresa had been in the back of this RAV4, and that's why the spaghetti pattern of blood was back there. There was also blood found on the cargo door frame area and a couple other drops of blood, I think, around that area. There were also multiple blood stains found in the front of the vehicle. There was one that's very infamous now of around the ignition area, but there was also other multiple stains found. Again, I'll be looking down to look at my notes. There was one found on the front driver's seat, and there was also a blood stain found on the console, and this was more of a reddish brown in color. There were blood droplets on the passenger seat, and then there was also a blood transfer stain found on a plastic CD case that was in the front passenger seat. But there was also a stain on the blood stain on the cargo door handle, and then there were also multiple unidentified fingerprints found inside the RAV4. So while Teresa's vehicle is being searched at the Madison Crime Lab, the Avery Salvage property becomes a crime scene, and they're searching everywhere basically. But considering that Stephen had this massive lawsuit filed against the Manitowoc County, the internal people decided that it was probably in their best interest to not head this investigation. They decided that they might want to take a step back and let somebody else take control or take the lead in this investigation. So that's when they called Calumet County, which was the neighboring county and the county that Teresa lived in. They were the ones that first got the report that Teresa was missing, but they called the Calumet County and asked them to take lead in this investigation. So Manitowoc called Calumet County and asked them to take lead in this investigation. But they didn't just stop at the Manitowoc County giving the investigation over to Calumet County. The prosecution, the prosecutor in Manitowoc County also decided to get a special prosecutor, and that was the prosecutor for Calumet County, and this is Ken Kratz. So Ken Kratz is going to be the prosecutor in this case, and then Mark Wiegert, and who was a sergeant for the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, he took lead in the investigation of Teresa's disappearance. And then Tom Fossbender, Mark Wiegert and Tom Fossbender were co-leads in this investigation. Tom Fossbender was a investigator for the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation. So like I said, they're searching the Avery residence for 8 days after this, and the Avery family is not allowed onto the property while this search is going on. While Stephen Avery and his family are at their cabin in Crevitz, Stephen actually talks to reporters, and he tells them stuff like, you know, if I was guilty, I would run. And he claims that he's innocent, and he doesn't know if he's a suspect in all of this. But he also tells the reporters that he believes that he's being set up again. He believes that if they are finding evidence against him, it's a setup and that it wasn't him, because he's completely innocent of Teresa's disappearance.
He says he has no idea why Teresa Halbach's car was found on his family's property. Do you have any idea how her SUV ended up on your family's land?
You got me. I don't know. I got a hunch. Manitowoc County planning it.
But then on November 8th, investigators would find a gruesome discovery. In Stephen Avery's fire pit, which was right behind his garage, they find human remains. And these weren't just like, they didn't find a body in the fire pit, they found cremains. So essentially a body had been burned and they only found bits and pieces of bone in his fire pit. One thing I do want to note real quick is that a coroner was not invited into the crime scene when the cremains were found. So there's that. So the human remains are taken from the burn pit and also transferred to the crime lab, and police keep searching. So Stephen Avery's home has been searched multiple times at this point. On the 6th search of his home, 2 Manitowoc Police Department officers find a key. This key has the Toyota emblem on it, and it also has the last part of the blue lanyard on it. Now, obviously, they don't know if this is Teresa's key, but they do take it into evidence, and it is sent to the Madison Crime Lab to see if it will turn on Teresa's car. When the crime lab people put the key in the ignition, it does turn over, but it doesn't start the car. That's when they realize that the battery to the car has been disconnected. Stephen Avery is arrested on November 9th, but he is not arrested in relation to Teresa Halbach, her murder, or her disappearance. He was actually arrested because inside Stephen's home they find rifles. Stephen is still a convicted felon, even though he was exonerated, because there were several charges he had faced before the Penny Bernstein charges. So he is still a convicted felon, and it is illegal for him to own firearms. So Stephen is arrested for on firearms charges and taken into custody. After he is taken into custody, Fossbender and Wiegert actually sit down and interrogate Stephen. During this interrogation, Stephen is completely adamant that he had nothing to do with Teresa's murder and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, that he is not involved in this case at all. But at this point, there are several pieces of evidence that are pointing towards Stephen. They were able to determine that the cremains that were found in the burn pit did belong to Teresa. In the remains, there was a tooth found, and they were able to use dental records to link that to Teresa. They also were able to test the blood that was found inside the RAV4. The blood in the front of the RAV4 seemed to come from Stephen Avery, and the blood that had the spaghetti pattern in the back belonged to Teresa Halbach. In a lot of evidence photos, you can see that Stephen had a pretty large gash in his finger right around the time that all of this happened, and police believe that he injured himself while harming Teresa, and that's how his blood got into the RAV4. They also find sweat evidence, sweat DNA evidence under the latch of Teresa's hood. Again, this is widely debated, and we will get into this more further down the line, but we will be here for days if I try to get into everything today. So they also do find sweat DNA under the latch of Teresa's hood, placing Stephen Avery at Teresa's car, opening the hood. When they did DNA testing on the key, they also found Stephen Avery's DNA on the key. I will say that they did not find Teresa's DNA on this key. Stephen Avery was then charged with first-degree murder and mutilation of a corpse. He was given 2 court-appointed attorneys, and his preliminary hearing was set. During the preliminary hearing, it was found out that the 2 Manitowoc police officers that had found the key were Sergeant Andy Colburn and James Link. And during this preliminary hearing, the judge did find that there was enough evidence to hold Stephen Avery on the murder charge and the mutilation of a corpse charge, and his bond was set to $500,000. After the charges came down, Stephen's family was behind him 100%. They wanted to try to get him out of jail, and they believed that he had been set up again, and probably because the $36 million lawsuit he had filed against Manitowoc County. Stephen's mother and father offered to put up the business as collateral to get Stephen out of prison, but this was denied, so Stephen was going to be stuck there until his trial was done. But Stephen's family wasn't the only one that was behind him. It seems like the entire town was split in half. There were some people who believed that Stephen was guilty of sin and that he had done it, and there were so many other people who thought that he was innocent and that Manitowoc County had set him up. During all of this, Stephen's lawsuit is still going against Manitowoc County, and Stephen would actually end up settling for $400,000 out of the $36 million he was asking for. The attorneys working on the case received 40% of the settlement, leaving Stephen with $160,000. At the recommendation of his civil attorneys, Stephen used the rest of that money to hire Dean Strang and Jerry Buting as his attorneys to represent him in the murder trials of Teresa Halbach. It did not take long for Dean and Jerry to start investigating this case themselves. They truly believed also that Stephen was completely innocent of what he had been accused of. But on March 1st of 2006, the special prosecutor Ken Kratz and Sheriff Pagel actually made a huge announcement in this case. Sheriff Pagel was the sheriff of Calumet County, and his county was taking lead, like we've already discussed, but they made a huge announcement in the case saying that they had actually taken Stephen's 16-year-old nephew into custody, Brendan Dassey. But it wasn't until March 2nd of 2006 that Ken Kratz and Sheriff Pagel sat down for a press conference to discuss what they had found with Brendan Dassey and why they had arrested him. During this press conference, they discuss what they think happened to Teresa because of Brendan's confession. As it turns out, Fossbender and Wiegert had actually sat down with Brendan and for like a 4-hour-long interview, and Brendan had completely confessed to all of it. This is a very long confession, about 4 hours long, and there's a lot of dead air in the confession, but you can watch it on YouTube. But in this interview, you can watch Brendan confess that both he and Stephen had essayed and then brutally murdered Teresa before burning her in the fire pit. Brendan Dassey was then also arrested and charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach, but on top of that, more charges were added, and there was false imprisonment charges added to both Brendan Dassey and Stephen Avery, but also essay charges were added to both of them as well. Brendan was also given a court-appointed attorney, but he was excused after it was found out that he was actually a second cousin of Teresa Halbach, and then he was given a new attorney. So as it would turn out, this confession that Brendan made was not the first contact he had had with investigators. He had had several point of contacts with these investigators, the first one being at the salvage yard when they were trying to get to the cabin in Crivets after the police found the RAV4. During this, it was a very short interview, but during this, Brendan said that he had no contact with Teresa Halbach and that he had never seen her, never talked to her, nothing like that, and was let go. It wasn't until several interviews later that Brendan would finally tell investigators that he was actually involved in the murder of Teresa Halbach. And some people find it strange because right before Brendan confessed to the murder of Teresa Halbach, Jody, Stephen's fiance, was actually being questioned by police, and she was in jail at the time. Let me back up just a little bit. Jody had been arrested several months before Teresa was murdered. She was arrested for DUI, and she was spending time in the Manitowoc County jail. While she was in jail and the investigation into Teresa's murder was going on, investigators would frequently try to visit her and try to get her to turn on Stephen. They came so often that Jody finally had to put in a request to not see these investigators anymore. And it was just a couple of days later that the investigators actually went after Brendan Dassey and questioned him, and finally Brendan confessed to the murder and essay of Teresa Halbach. During Brendan's interview, it is important to note that Brendan was read his Miranda rights, but he did not have a parent with him, and he also did not have an attorney with him. So he was alone. A 16-year-old boy was alone with these two investigators. I'm not going to get too far into Brendan today because we've already been here for such a long time, but I will dedicate a video to Brendan alone. So we'll get into Brendan's confession later on down the line, but a lot of people think that his confession was coerced. So after Brendan's confession, he is actually offered multiple plea deals. Ken Kratz gives Brendan several plea deals. One saying that if he'll testify against Stephen, that he'll get 15 years and be out. He'd be out by now if he had taken that plea deal. But Brendan says no to all of them and decides to go to trial. But there were several charges pending against both them. First-degree murder, mutilation of a corpse, false imprisonment, and SA. But the false imprisonment and SA charges are the only reason that they, or the only evidence that they have for supporting these two charges are Brendan's confession. The judge decides in both cases that this is not enough to convict both of them. So these two charges are eventually dropped from both Brendan and Stephen Avery. So that just leaves the first-degree murder charge and the mutilation of a corpse charge. But the first-degree murder charge has a life sentence if they are found guilty. So while defense teams are waiting for trial to start, they're still investigating and trying to come up with their defense plan. It seems like Jerry Buting and Dean Strang are going to go with the defense that Stephen is being set up. So they start trying to find evidence to support this. During their investigation, they find that a vial of Stephen's blood is being held at the Manitowoc County Clerk's office, which is not a proper place to have evidence of any kind. Even a case as old as 1985, but it's not okay to have this evidence there. And it also looks like the styrofoam box that this is in has been opened. They also find a hole on top of the tube of blood. This is very strange and a very strange find for Jerry and Dean. I mean, that's pretty huge. The judge in Stephen's case decides that Dean and Jerry can bring up the fact that Stephen was wrongfully convicted in 1985. This is pretty huge for them as well. They were also able to use the blood evidence that they found. So these are all huge things that will really help Stephen in the end, because this really could help prove that he was framed for the murder of Teresa Halbach. Stephen's trial begins on February 12th of 2007, and Jerry Buting and Dean Strang do use the defense that they believe that Stephen was set up because of this $36 million lawsuit against the county because of his wrongful conviction in 1985. This trial lasted until March 15th, and then the jury was sent to deliberate. It would only take the jurors 3 days to come back with a guilty verdict. Stephen was found guilty on first-degree murder, a felon in possession of a firearm, but he was acquitted of the mutilation of a corpse charge, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but okay. So he was acquitted of that, but since he was found guilty on the first-degree murder charge, that is a mandatory life in prison sentence. Brendan's trial would start on April 16th, and during his trial, his taped confession was played for the jury. Brendan did opt, unlike his, Stephen never testified in his trial, but Brendan did opt to testify in his own trial. He tells the jury while he's testifying that he lied during the confession, but he doesn't quite know why. And when asked where he got these gruesome details from, he says that he got them from a book he read called Kiss the Girls. Brendan's trial does not last near as long as Stephen Avery's does, and the jury was excused to deliberate on April 25th. It only took them 4.5 hours of deliberation to come back with a guilty verdict. Brendan was found guilty of first-degree murder and mutilation of a corpse. I think I said that it was a mandatory life in prison. That's incorrect. Excuse me if I did, but Stephen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Brendan was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2048. There are a couple of strange things when it comes to the jury. I believe that there were 2 jurors in Stephen Avery's trial that had connections to Manitowoc County Police, to the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office, and there was also a juror that was excused the very first day of deliberation because of a family emergency, and he says that when they took their first vote, that 7 people thought that Stephen was innocent, while the rest, or there was like 2 unsure and the rest were guilty. So he was kind of shocked to find out that they came back with a guilty verdict, but we'll get into that some more. There are a lot of strange pieces of evidence when it comes to this case, but we have been talking forever again. And don't throw hate at me. I know this is an insanely watered down version of the case, but There is so much. It gets very overwhelming very fast, and I'm not trying to overwhelm people. I'm just trying to get all of the information out there. So be patient with me. I will get another video up, I'm hoping on Saturday, and then we will discuss a little bit more of the evidence that is found when it comes to Steven Avery's case. It's going to take a minute to get all of this out there, but I'm hoping to get this done in 4 to 5 videos. But it's just, even just trying to search Steven Avery, like I was trying to find information on his previous, like the burglaries he had been involved in, and you can't find anything because it's so just saturated in information from this side, from that side. You can't even hardly make sense of any of it. It has taken me a month to get 2 episodes. So we will get into a whole lot more. Just be patient with me, but that is a very watered down version of what happened to Teresa Halbach. But like I said, as we move forward in discussing this case, please remember to focus on Teresa. She's the one who lost her life in this, and there's more victims in this case, like Sandra Morris and Penny Bernstein. These are real victims. These are real people, and this really happened to them, and I just want to focus on them as we move forward. So with all of that being said, this is going to be a long video, but all of them are going to be. But with that being said, that's really all I have for you today. I hope this finds you well. I hope this finds you safe and loved. And if you don't feel loved today, remember that I do love you. And I'm sending you so much love. And I will see you again next week. Well, no, not next week. Hopefully Saturday with the rest of this. But yes, love you all so much. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your mental health. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.